They called it imperium sine fine, an empire without end, but behind Rome's polished marble and immortal legends lies a legacy carved not in glory, but in blood. Rome was not merely a nation. It was a relentless engine of conquest, fueled by fire, iron, and fear. Where Rome advanced, resistance was not pacified. It was obliterated. Entire cultures vanished under the march of its legions, their names lost, their cities reduced to ash, their stories silenced. Rome's dominion reshaped the world as we know it, but at a price few dared to acknowledge. What some celebrate as the dawn of civilization, others endured as an age of devastation. And history remembers both. To challenge Rome was to risk not just death, but a death so brutal it would serve as a lesson to thousands more. Crucifixion was not simply execution, it was political theater, a spectacle of terror. Known to the Romans as crux, the cross stood as a towering message. To rebel was to suffer slowly, publicly, and without mercy. Crucifixion was reserved for slaves, rebels, and those considered the lowest in society. A calculated tool of fear during Rome's relentless expansion. Submission promised survival, resistance promised obliteration. When Spartacus led his legendary slave revolt, Rome responded with a display so horrifying it echoed through time. After crushing the rebellion in 71 BCE, the general Crassus ordered the crucifixion of over 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way, the very road leading to the heart of Rome. Their bodies stretched for over 100 miles, a grim procession proclaiming Rome's absolute power. The historian Appian recounted this terrifying display, which ensured no future slave uprising ever reached the scale of Spartacus's revolt. But crucifixion was not reserved for slaves alone. In Judea, Gaul, and Britannia, local revolts often ended in mass crucifixions staged as public warnings. Posts sometimes stood in conquered cities for months, silent threats to all who might defy Roman rule. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were deliberate strategies of psychological warfare. Pain became propaganda, and fear became policy. Rome's capacity for ruthlessness was equally apparent in its destruction of Carthage. This was not just a military victory, it was the erasure of a rival civilization. The phrase, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, reverberated through the Roman Senate, repeated endlessly by Cato the Elder, who ended every speech with it regardless of topic. His words became prophecy in 146 BCE at the end of the Third Punic War. Carthage, once the only power capable of challenging Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean, had already suffered defeat twice before, but Rome demanded absolute assurance that Carthage would never rise again. Under the command of Scipio Aemilianus, Roman forces laid siege to Carthage for over 2 years. When the city finally fell, it was reduced to rubble. Ancient sources like Appian describe Carthage burning for days. Its people, men, women, and children, killed or enslaved, its buildings torn down stone by stone. While the famous story of Romans sowing salt into Carthage's soil is likely a myth, the symbolism remains undeniable. Rome didn't merely defeat Carthage, it sought to wipe it from memory entirely. Rome's message was clear. Some enemies would not be subdued, they would be erased. The same brutal determination marked Rome's conquest of Gaul. When Julius Caesar turned his sights northward in the mid-1st century BCE, he did not merely aim for conquest, he sought to fundamentally transform the region. Gaul, a land of fiercely independent tribes, became the proving ground for one of history's most ruthless military campaigns. Over nearly a decade, Caesar's legions slaughtered hundreds of thousands, leaving some cities wiped off the map entirely. A notorious example came with the siege of Avaricum in 52 BCE. Located in what is now central France, the city resisted Roman control during the wider Gallic revolt led by Vercingetorix. Caesar himself described Avaricum as the most beautiful city in all Gaul, but beauty offered no shield. After a prolonged siege, Roman forces stormed the city and slaughtered nearly all of its 40,000 inhabitants. Similar fates awaited cities like Cenabum, Noviodunum, and Uxellodunum, which were burned, depopulated, or their people sold into slavery. At Uxellodunum, Caesar ordered the hands of surrendering warriors to be cut off, turning them into living warnings to terrify others into submission. These acts were not reckless excesses of war. They were deliberate strategies to crush the will to resist. By systematically destroying urban centers, Caesar ensured that rebellion became unthinkable. In Gaul, Rome wasn't merely building an empire, it was erasing any alternative to its rule, one city at a time. Rome's cruelty extended beyond the battlefield to the slow agony of siege warfare. Starvation was not an unfortunate consequence of besieging a city, it was a core strategy. Instead of launching immediate assaults, Roman commanders often encircled cities, severing supply lines and waiting as hunger and desperation weakened their enemies. This tactic was codified into Roman military thinking. Cutting off food and water drained both morale and strength, conserving Roman lives and resources. The strategist Frontinus described it as a wise economy of blood, a method to win without wasting Roman soldiers. One of the most harrowing examples was the siege of Numantia in Hispania between 134 and 133 BCE. The Celtiberian defenders refused to surrender, so Scipio Aemilianus encircled the city with walls, cutting off all outside supplies. Starvation soon set in, and with no reinforcements coming, the citizens chose death over capture. Ancient accounts describe mass suicides and fires set by the desperate inhabitants. Centuries later, in 70 CE, during the siege of Jerusalem, Roman forces under Titus repeated the tactic. Encircled and cut off, the city's population starved as resistance crumbled. Josephus, a historian of the time, recorded the unbearable suffering, writing that the dead were beyond counting. Rome's sieges did not simply break defenses, they broke spirits, proving that hunger was as deadly as the sword. To the Romans, conquest was not complete until the defeated were made profitable. Mass enslavement wasn't an incidental outcome of victory, it was a deliberate state-sanctioned policy. Cities that resisted too long or too fiercely were emptied of their populations, who were sold into slavery to fund future campaigns and reward Rome's legions. This system built one of history's largest slave economies, with constant streams of captives arriving from Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, North Africa, and the eastern Mediterranean. After the sack of Epirus in 167 BCE, General Aemilius Paulus enslaved 150,000 people. According to Plutarch, the resulting plunder was so immense that Rome suspended taxes on its citizens for years afterward until the chaos of civil war forced them to resume. Enslaved people worked farms, mines, households, and even administrative offices, their lives and labor forming the silent bedrock of Rome's wealth. Those taken after military victories were often treated as disposable. Livy wrote of entire towns in Liguria and Gaul emptied of people, marched off in chains as commodities of conquest. After the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, Josephus recorded over 90,000 enslaved, many sent to back-breaking labor or paraded in Rome's triumphal processions. The strongest and youngest were sold in foreign markets, their fates tied to the whims of distant masters. To Rome, enslaved peoples were both punishment and prize, their suffering paving roads, raising temples, and building a civilization that forgot the true cost of its grandeur. Rome's empire was built not only with law, engineering, and architecture, but with calculated brutality, systemic oppression, and a culture of fear. These horrors were not isolated incidents, but institutionalized practices that reshaped entire societies or wiped them from existence entirely. The echoes of these strategies endure not just in the ruins scattered across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, but in the very ways power is wielded even today. How should we measure the greatness of a civilization? By what it constructed or by what it was willing to destroy to survive? As Tacitus so chillingly wrote, they make a desert and call it peace.